Good morning. Today's topic is visual reflexes and visual evoked potential. Visual pathway has already been discussed. I would just like to revise that visual signals, they leave the retina through the optic nerve. Optic nerve, it contains from the retina, it contains both the nasal fibers as well as temporal fibers. Nasal fibers, they cross at the optic chiasma and they will join the ipsilateral temporal fibers to form the optic tract. Most of the fibers from the optic tract, they will relate in the lateral geniculate body, and from the lateral geniculate body arises geniculocalcarine fibers which will terminate into the primary visual cortex of the occipital lobe. Now, from the optic tract, few fibers, they will leave the optic tract and they will enter into the subcortical regions of the brain. Few fibers, they will leave the optic tract and they will enter into the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the hypothalamus. This is the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the hypothalamus, which will then control the circadian rhythm. Few of the fibers, they will enter into the pretectum and they are responsible for controlling pupillary light reflex. Few fibers, they will enter into the superior colliculus and they will control the movement of eyes and head towards the direction of visual disturbances. Now, before starting with the visual reflexes, I would like to discuss about the autonomic innervation of the eye. Eye is innervated both by the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Now, the parasympathetic nervous system or the parasympathetic fibers, they arise from the third cranial nerve nucleus, which is also known as Edinger-Westphal nucleus. Visual signals from the eye, they reach to the pretectal region through the optic nerve, or you can say second cranial nerve. Fibers from the optic nerves, they relay in the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, which is known as third nerve nucleus. From the third nerve nucleus, preganglionic parasympathetic fibers will arise, which will terminate into the ciliary ganglion. From the ciliary ganglion, post-ganglionic parasympathetic fibers will arise, which will travel through the short ciliary nerves and they will innervate the ciliary muscles and sphincter pupillae muscles of the iris. Now, regarding the sympathetic nerve supply, sympathetic nerve fibers, they arise from the intermediolateral horn of the first thoracic segment of the spinal cord. From here, the fibers, they reach the sympathetic chain of the ganglion. They will travel in the sympathetic chain of the ganglion and they will reach the superior cervical sympathetic ganglion. Here, preganglionic fibers will be relayed and postganglionic fibers will arise, which will travel along with the carotid nerve plexus and will enter the skull through the fifth cranial nerve, and the postganglionic fibers, then they will travel through the ciliary nerve and they will supply the dilator pupillary muscles of the iris and extraocular muscles of the eye and levator palpebrae muscles. Now, whenever there is a lesion in the sympathetic pathway, it leads to a condition that is known as Horner's syndrome, which is characterized by meiosis. Meiosis means constriction of the pupil. Function of the sympathetic nervous system, stimulation of the sympathetic nervous system results into dilatation of the pupil. But once there is damage to the sympathetic nervous system, then it will cause meiosis, that is constriction of pupil, and isochoria. And isochoria means unequal pupil, because there would be meiosis on the affected side and other eye will be normal. Then it would result into ptosis. Ptosis means drooping of the eyelid. Because the sympathetic innervation, it supplies the extraocular muscle and levator palpebrae, so there would be loss of the sympathetic innervation will result in the drooping of eyelids, that is known as ptosis, then there would be loss of sweating on the affected side. This condition is known as Horner's syndrome. Now this is the pathway which has already been discussed. Now for the sympathetic pathway, preganglionic fibers, they arise from the intermediolateral horn of the spine, first thoracic segment of the spinal cord. From there, preganglionic fibers will enter into the sympathetic chain of ganglion and they will relay in the superior cervical ganglion. From here, post-ganglionic sympathetic fibers will arise, which will enter into the skull through the fifth cranial nerve, and through the long ciliary nerves, they will supply dilator pupillary muscles of the iris and levator palpebral muscle. Now this is the pathway for parasympathetic pathway, which results into pupillary constriction. The signals from the retina, they leave through the optic nerve. From the optic nerve, fibers reaches to pretectal nucleus. From pretectal nucleus, fibers, they relay in the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, from where the preganglionic parasympathetic fibers will arise. These preganglionic parasympathetic fibers will enter into the ciliary ganglion. They will travel through the third cranial nerve nucleus and they will enter into the ciliary ganglion, where they will synapse, and post-ganglionic parasympathetic fibers will arise, which through the short ciliary nerves will supply the constrictor muscles of the iris and ciliary muscles, resulting into constriction of pupil. So parasympathetic stimulation results into constriction of pupil. Now visual reflex. There are two visual reflex. One is accommodation reflex and second is pupillary light reflex. Pupillary light reflex, it is of two types, direct and indirect reflex, or you can say consensual reflex. In direct pupillary light reflex, when a light is shown into the eye, it causes constriction of pupil in the same eye as well as on the opposite side also. So whenever there is constriction of pupil in the same eye, it is known as direct pupillary light reflex, and wherein there is constriction of pupil in the opposite eye, it is known as indirect pupillary light reflex. Now, what is reflex? It has already been stated that it is the involuntary and instantaneous motor response to a stimuli. Now, reflex, it involves receptor, afferent, efferent, and an effector organ. It has already been taught to you. So, it is just a sort of revision. This slide, it shows the direct and consensual pupillary light reflex. When the light is shown into the particular eye and two eyes are separated from each other from the barrier so that the light rays does not reach the other side of the eye. So when the light is shown into one eye, it will cause constriction of pupil in that eye, and this reflex is known as direct pupillary light reflex. And at the same time, there will be constriction of pupil in the opposite eye where light rays does not reach. So this reflex is known as indirect pupillary light reflex. Now, what is the pathway for the light reflex and what is the cause of the direct and consensual pupillary light reflex? Now, as I have already told you that reflex, it has an afferent and it has an efferent. So, in case of pupillary light reflex, afferent is second cranial nerve, that is optic nerve, which will carry signal from the eye to through the third cranial, and efferent is third cranial nerve, that is oculomotor nerve. So, signals from the eye, they will leave the eye through the optic nerve, and optic nerve, then signals will reach the optic tract, and from the optic tract, few of the fibers, they will enter into the pretectal nucleus. Fibers arise from the pretectal nucleus and they will reach the Edinger-Westphal nucleus of both the sides. There is crossing of the fibers in front and back of the ductus sylvius. So the fibers arising from the pretectal nucleus, they will reach the Edinger-Westphal nucleus of both the sides, and from the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, the fibers will arise which will travel through the third cranial nerve, that is known as optic nerve, to reach the ciliary ganglion. And once they reach the ciliary ganglion, post-ganglionic parasympathetic fibers will arise, which will travel through the short ciliary nerves, and they will reach the sphincter, pupillae, and ciliary muscles of the eye, resulting into constriction of pupil. Why there is direct and consensual light reflex? Because of the fibers reaching Edinger-Westphal nucleus of both the sides. So the signals, they are transmitted to both the eyes because of crossing of the fibers between the pretectal nucleus and Edinger-Westphal nucleus. Now, what is abnormal pupillary reflex? Abnormal pupillary reflex is seen normally whenever light is thrown in the eye, it will result into constriction of pupil. But sometimes when there is lesion in the pathway of the reflex, or whenever there is damage to the ciliary muscles of the iris, it results into abnormal pupillary reflex. One of the abnormal pupil is known as Argyll-Robertson pupil, which is seen in the condition known as neurosyphilis. What is Argyll-Robertson pupil? In Argyll-Robertson pupil, accommodation reflex is present, but light reflex is lost. So it is easy to remember A for Argyll, R for Robertson, and P for pupil, and just you remember accommodation reflex present, ARP. In Argyll-Robertson pupil, accommodation reflex is present and light reflex is lost. This is seen in condition which is known as neurosyphilis, which causes damage to the fibers between the pretectum and Edinger-Westphal nucleus. Another pupil is known as Eddy's pupil or myotonic pupil, in which there is damage to parasympathetic nerve fibers beyond the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, which results into partial constriction of pupil which does not respond to light. Horner syndrome I have already discussed. Horner syndrome is because of the damage to the sympathetic innervation, and on the affected side you will see meiosis, anisocoria, ptosis, and anhidrosis. Now we will discuss about accommodation reflex. Accommodation reflex has already been taught to you. What is accommodation? Accommodation is ability of the person to see the distant object as well as near objects. And the response which is seen, when a person sees a distant object and a near object, some changes they occur in the eye, and this is known as accommodation reflex, which is characterized by 3C, that is constriction of pupil, contraction of ciliary muscles, and convergence of visual axis. Contraction of ciliary muscles, it results into increase in the anterior curvature of the lens, and convergence of visual axis is because of the contraction of the medial rectus muscle. Now, what is the pathway for accommodation? So, visual signals from the visual pathway, they will reach the primary visual cortex, and from the primary visual cortex, they will reach the frontal eye field, that is area 8. From the frontal eye field, signals will go to Edinger-Westphal nucleus. From Edinger-Westphal nucleus, through the third cranial nerve, signals will reach ciliary ganglion, and through short ciliary nerve, signals will reach the ciliary muscles, medial rectus muscle, and constrictor pupillae, resulting into convergence of pupil and constriction of pupil, which has already been shown when we were discussing the sympathetic and parasympathetic innervation to the eye. Now, this is the flowchart diagram showing the accommodation reflex and pathway for accommodation reflex. Signals from the visual cortex, they reach the frontal eye field. From the frontal eye field, signals, they reach the Edinger-Westphal nucleus. From the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, signals go to ciliary ganglion, and through the short ciliary nerve, the signals, they reach the sphincter pupillae and ciliary muscle, resulting into constriction of pupil and contraction of ciliary muscle, increasing the anterior curvature of the lens, which plays a very important role in accommodation. Now, from the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, signals are sent to medial rectus muscle, and contraction of the medial rectus muscle results into convergence of the eyeball. Now, you know what are the muscles which are responsible for the movement of the normal movement of the eye, and what is their innervation. So the eye movements, they are controlled by three pairs of muscle: medial and lateral rectus muscle. There are three groups of muscles: medial and lateral recti, superior and inferior recti, superior and inferior oblique muscles, which are responsible for the movement of the eye. All the muscles of the eye, except superior oblique, which is supplied by the fourth cranial nerve, lateral rectus, which is supplied by the sixth cranial nerve, all the muscles of the eye, they are supplied by the third cranial nerve. Now, there are certain movements that you should know. So, and which we see in day-to-day life. What are the saccadic movements? Saccadic movements, they are the jumping movements of the eye from one object to other. When you are traveling in a train or a bus and the object is moving, train or bus is moving, and the visual scene is stationary, then you can see that from the window you are fixing your gaze from one object to another object, that is from tree, then house, then animal, then car, etc. So you will fix your gaze on the object. You are moving, but the visual scene is not moving, and you are fixing your gaze from one object to another. This is known as jumping from one object to another, or you can say that it is also known as saccades or saccadic movement. Whenever you are reading a book, then also when you are focusing from one line to another, from one word to another, these movements are the saccadic movements. When you move your gaze from the one line to another line, from the top of the page to the bottom of the page, all these movements, they are saccadic movements. What are pursuit movements? Pursuit movements are when your gaze is fixed on the moving objects. Suppose you see a butterfly, and then you fix your gaze on the butterfly, and as the butterfly moves from one plant to another or one flower to another, you will just trace the path of the butterfly, and those movements are known as pursuit movement. If you see a aeroplane moving in the sky and you fix your gaze on the moving aeroplane, then those movements are known as pursuit movements. Then what is nystagmus? Nystagmus, it is the rhythmic oscillatory movements which is seen when you ask the subject to fix his gaze on one object. And there are various reasons for nystagmus. Then what is strabismus? Strabismus, it is also known as squint, जिसे हम हिंदी में भैंगापन भी कहते हैं, and sometimes you call it as person is looking London and talking Tokyo. So what is strabismus? Normally the visual axis of both the eyes are parallel to each other. But whenever there is lack of fusion of visual axis of the eye in one or more plane, that is horizontal, vertical or rotational, that is known as horizontal, vertical or rotational strabismus. Now in this diagram, in this figure, you can see that the child is suffering from strabismus. When you ask the child to fix his eyes on one object. One of the eyes visual axis is normal, but as he is not able to focus the other visual axis, he will try to move it in a different direction so as to see the object clearly, and in that case we see that there is inward movement of one eye. So this condition is known as strabismus. Now there is another term that you should know, which is known as depth perception. What is depth perception? It is the ability of the eye to determine the distance of the object. So how a person perceives the distance of the object. How you will come to know regarding the distance of the object, that is done by three mechanisms. First is by comparing the size of images of known object on the retina. Second is by the phenomena of moving parallax, and third is by the phenomena of stereopsis, that is known as binocular vision. What do you mean by comparing the size of images of known object on the retina? So if you know this actual size of the known object, suppose you know the size of the Mercedes car and you are standing on the 13th floor. Now the size of the object which is formed on the retina will be very small, and you know the actual size of the car. So brain will automatically calculate the distance from the object, image of the object that is formed on the retina. You know actual size of the aeroplane. So when the aeroplane is moving in the sky, if it is flying very high or the distance is more, then a very small image will be formed on the retina. But if the plane is flying very low, the size of the image that is formed on the retina will be bigger. So your brain knows the actual size of the plane and what is the size of the image, object that is formed on the retina, and from that brain will automatically calculate the distance of the object. Now what is the phenomena of moving parallax? You ask the subject to fix the gaze on the distant object, and then you ask the person to move his head from side to side. Objects which are closer to the eye, they will move across the retina, but the objects which are present far off, they will not move. So the distance can be calculated. And another phenomenon, stereopsis, that is known as binocular vision, that plays a very important role in depth perception, that is knowing the distance of the object. Now various tests are performed to see the normal functioning of the eye, and the name of these tests are visual acuity, perimetry, color vision test, ERG is electroretinogram, electrooculogram, and visual evoked potential. These last three are the electrophysiological tests, and the upper three will be performed in the practical laboratory. Perimetry, it has already been discussed. Color vision test has already been discussed. I would like to explain in short regarding the visual acuity. What is visual acuity? It has already been taught, but still I would like to discuss. What is visual acuity? It is the resolving power of the eye. It is responsible for acute and detailed vision. Visual acuity is maximum at fovea, where only cones are present, and diameter of the cone at the fovea is around 1.5 micrometer. Then the visual acuity, normal visual acuity for the human eye is about 25 seconds of an hour. What do you mean by 25 seconds of an hour? If you consider a clock and the time or the angle which is formed between the two pointers showing the time of 25 seconds, then that angle is known as normal visual angle, and it is calculated to be 25 seconds of an hour. Now, what is visual acuity? How it is defined? It is the minimum separable distance by which if the 2-point sources are separated, they will be seen as 2. But if the distance is decreased, then 2-point sources will be seen as 1. So that is the visual acuity. Now here you can see that there are 2-point sources. So the distance, if the distance between the center of the 2-point sources is about 2 micrometer, which is slightly greater than the width or the diameter of the cones present in the fovea, then the angle formed at the nodal point of the eye is 25 seconds of an arc, and the person will be able to see as 2 objects. But if the distance is decreased beyond 2 micrometer, then person will see 2-point stimulus as 1. So minimum visual angle, it is about 25 seconds. Now, how the visual acuity is tested in the laboratory? You will do the testing of visual acuity in the practical class with the help of Snellen's chart. What is Snellen's chart? It is the black and white chart. Background is black, and block letters, black block letters, they are printed on the Snellen's chart. Okay, and the size of the letters is different. And the person is asked to sit or to stand 6 feet away from the Snellen's chart. This is the diagram of, this is the chart, this is the Snellen's chart, and you can see that background is black, background is white, and on the white background, black letters are printed. And the size is different, decreasing from top to bottom. Now this, how the size of the letter is determined. Each letter, it will substance a visual angle of 5 minutes at the nodal point of the eye, and the individual portion, individual components of the letter will subtend an angle of 1 minute at the nodal point of the eye. So the construction of letter, it depends on this phenomena, that each individual letter will subtend an angle of 5 minutes at the nodal point, and the individual component or the 2 parallel lines will subtend an angle of 1 minute at the nodal point. The size decreases from top to bottom, and you can see a figure is written just below each line, indicating the distance in meter. You will ask the person to read the letters with one eye closed from top to bottom, and you will note the line at which the person is able to read. Now, if the person is able to read up to Y, where 6 is written, then the visual acuity of the person will be 6 by 6, which is the normal visual acuity. It is written as 6 by 6. So the numerator shows the distance at which the person is standing or sitting. So 6 means the person is reading this chart from the distance of 6 meter, and denominator is also 6, which indicates that the normal person is able to read it from the distance of 6 meter. Suppose the person is able to read it up to this line where 18 is written. Then the visual acuity will be 6 by 18. That means the normal person is able to read it from the distance of 18 meters, which this person is able to read it from the distance of 6 meters. So visual acuity will be 6 by 18. Similarly, for the near vision, we use another chart that is known as Jaggers chart. We ask the person to hold the chart at the distance of about 25 centimeters, and we ask the person to read the letters written on this chart. And then we note the line up to which the person can read. So normal visual acuity for near vision is N6. But suppose if the person is able to read up to this line, then visual acuity of the person will be N10. Now, what is electroretinogram? These are the electrophysiological changes or recording which is obtained to see the functional ability of the eye. Electroretinogram, it is the record of series of electrical changes occurring in the eye when light strikes the eye. So, what is the importance of doing electroretinogram? It is used to detect the functional abnormalities up to bipolar cells before the ophthalmoscopic signs appear. So it is the early diagnostic test to detect the functional abnormalities in the receptors of the eye. Now the second test is electrooculogram. It measures the resting membrane potential of the eye between the cornea and back of the eye. It reflects the presynaptic functions of the retina. Then third is the visual evoked potential. What is visual evoked potential? It is the record of gross electrical signals generated at occipital cortex in response to visual stimuli. The amplitude of VEP is from 3 to 25 microvolts, which is much smaller than that of the EEG. In case of EEG, amplitude of the waves is about 100 microvolts. Now, what is the objective of visual evoked potential? So, visual evoked potential, it is used clinically to assess the functional status of the visual system beyond the retinal ganglionic cells. Now, there are two types of VEP. One is the pattern VEP, in which the checkerboard pattern is shown on the TV monitor, and second is the flash VEP. That means diffuse light is used to stimulate the cortex, and it is usually pattern VEP is more reliable, and flash VEP is used in cases of uncooperative patients. Now, this slide is showing the type of stimulus that is given. This is the flash. Occipital cortex is relatively insensitive to flash light. Okay, but it is most sensitive to edges of the contrast. And this pattern of checks can be changed. Now, what is the method? A person is asked to sit 1 meter from the monitor, pupils are undilated, and electrodes are placed on the head. And 2 and 3 different checker sizes are shown, and recording is done. So this type of wave pattern is obtained. Now this green shows the latency. Green arrow shows the latency, that is the time from the point of stimulus to the obtaining the response. So latency is very important, because latency, it indicates the conduction velocity, and it shows the condition of the myelination of the nerve fiber. And amplitude, it depends upon the number of fibers in the optic nerve. Now, if acuity is in question, then amplitude of the graph is considered, and if the lesion in the visual pathway, that is conduction velocity, will be affected, then latency is considered. Latency is more reliable. Now, what is the clinical application of visual evoked potential? It is done in cases of unexplained visual loss, optic neuritis, multiple sclerosis, cortical blindness, amblyopia, and glaucoma. Thank you so much.